And a very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Issues and Attitudes. My name is Jeff Owens, Interim Director at WEIU. My co-host is Mr. Daniel Jones.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you once again for having me.
And joining us on Zoom today is Senator Dale Ryder. Dale, how are you?
I'm good, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm great. We got technology going on. We got a lot of people around, just so you know. So we're hoping everything works, but so far so good. I guess we'll start off, Dale, with the question that's on everybody's mind in terms of, since we talked to you last, how has COVID affected your job and what you guys are doing and gals are doing in Springfield?
Well, like a lot of people, I'm doing a lot of this, right? A lot of conversations, committee hearings, meetings. I mean, the gatherings that once, most of which were in person, now are being done through this kind of medium. It's been an adjustment. I think actually there probably have been some efficiencies discovered, and that when all this is over, you're going to see a greater utilization of this kind of medium or other technology to make what once were in-person conversations maybe a little less frequent, maybe travel a little bit less frequent. But I'm getting back. I'm looking forward to getting back to socialization and in-person conversations again soon.
All right, Daniel, see if he can hear you for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Can you hear Daniel? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Since this is your last year in as the state senator, what were some things that you had planned before that you didn't get to do because of COVID? And if you kind of restructured those events or had different things going on, can you tell us about that?
You know what? I really didn't think of my last year as kind of like some big, send off and with a bunch of plans to do this and that. There really wasn't anything like that. I mean, I told myself when I announced that I wasn't running again that I needed to finish my job, right? I mean, that's what the taxpayers pay me for. That's why they elected me. And so really, it wasn't about, okay, I'm going to try to find memorable landmarks here and there to do things, to have conversations. It was just to go about my job and do what I need to do. And this has been a challenge. There's no question about that. And I will admit that particularly with regards to the last legislative session this past spring, it was kind of a weird last one to have because we were in Springfield for just a handful of days in person. And even then it was a stilted process compared to what we usually have. But, that's what it is. And so, like I said, my job is just to do my job.
Where are we right now in the state of Illinois in terms of budget and the process?
So the General Assembly adopted a fiscal year 21 budget at the end of at the end of month of May. Right now, we're keeping an eye on revenues and how they're doing. Remember, the budget that passed, unfortunately, had between a $5 and $6 million hole in it. The Democrats who run Springfield, banking on the federal government coming through with yet another stimulus package. Many of us were very concerned, particularly in an election year, whether or not we could make that bet. And I'm concerned now that unfortunately our concerns may have been very well laid, because you see in Washington where there has not been an agreement on yet another stimulus package. Even if there is one, I'm not sure it is going to get Illinois the $5 or $6 billion that is the hole that's in our budget right now. And that will be something that lawmakers will have to deal with, perhaps as early as this veto session, but I would guess probably the new General Assembly that is sworn in the second week of January, this will be one of their first orders of business.
The upcoming November election, the one confusing thing that I think has people in Illinois is this income tax amendment. Could you try to explain it as easily and fairly as a Dale Ryder can?
Sure. So the proposal would eliminate the language that's currently in the Illinois Constitution that requires a flat tax. I mean, right now, the Constitution requires that all Illinoisans, individuals, when they pay an income tax, pay the same rate. They don't pay the same amount. They pay the same rate. So this would strike that language. It would also strike the language in the Constitution that makes it unconstitutional to subject your income to more than one kind of tax. And there's a lot of debate on the issue of whether or not Illinois should have a flat tax or a graduated tax. There's not much discussion on the second issue that I raised because, and I think that we need to talk about that, because if you remove that constitutional prohibition, then it would allow state government to what I call layer taxes. So you might pay one rate on your income, but then you might pay a second higher rate on passive income or rental income or retirement income, and then the list goes on and on. Right now, that's unconstitutional in Illinois. This would make that permissible. So those are kind of the two things that the proposal really does.
Okay. I saw, again, it's all about TV commercials right now, and one that says this is very bad for small businesses. What's your opinion about that?
Well, I mean, I would tend to agree with that argument, and here's why. When the governor first unveiled his proposal was that the highest marginal rate, the highest tax rate, would apply only to incomes of $1 million or more. By the time that proposal made it to the Senate for a vote, that had come from $1 million down to $500,000. And by the time it became law, it's now $250,000. And I would suggest to you that that is a trend that is going to continue. That as the General Assembly discovers that it does not have enough money to spend the money it wants to, or that Washington isn't going to bail it out, or whatever it is that income to which the maximum rate applies will continue to come down. Now, that's not just a Republican speaking in a paranoid fashion about Democrat majorities. If you look around the country at other states that have graduated taxes, you'll find that's exactly what's happened in other states. In fact, it's happened 20 times in the last 20 years where that maximum income, or that income to which the maximum threshold is applicable, has dropped below 100,000. So I think that's the concern, and I think for a lot of small business owners, I mean, to be a successful small business, you get past $100,000 or $200,000 pretty quick.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thrust of that commercial, and I think the concern's well founded.
Okay, Daniel has a question. Go ahead.
I kind of wanted to dig a little bit into some of the bills you introduced to legislator, particularly the EIU tuition discount program. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Jeff, I'm having trouble hearing him now.
He wanted to talk about the EIU discount legislation, I think, and I know you also introduced some anti-corruption legislation. Daniel wanted to talk about some of the things that you introduced into legislation and get your feel for them.
Here recently on the ethics package.
Yeah.
There are some what I and I think a lot of my constituents would look at these proposals and say, wow, do you really have to prohibit that? Well, if you have to, I guess you should, right? One is legislators, while they're in office, being paid to be lobbyists. So, if you look at the wide sweeping federal investigation that's going on right now, you now have two indictments for what were sitting legislators, and one of them was involved in just that, a paid lobbying scheme, and led to an attempt to bribe another state senator who was wearing a wire for the federal government because of tax evasion issues. I mean, it becomes a complicated web. So there is a lobbying ban. For the first time, we would impose a 1-year revolving door on a legislator leaving office to lobby, and in fact the bill would say that they have to wait at least 12 months between the time they leave office to the time they go to work as a lobbyist, or the expiration of their term to which they were elected. Because what we have seen in some instances, Jeff, is legislators leave in midterm and literally walk out of the Capitol on Monday, and by Wednesday they are back in the Capitol wearing their lobbyist tag. Wow. And what they're doing, obviously, is working the relationships they had. In fact, there's one legislator in Illinois, sad to say a Republican, who sponsored a piece of legislation, and as it was moving through the legislature, left, went to work as a lobbyist, and lobbied on behalf of that legislation.
You would
That's
think
just silly.
Yeah, you would think.
Right, exactly. And these are the things, Jeff, that people in my district, and I think people all around the state, they look at Springfield and they give up hope, right? They look at their state government and they say, this is hopelessly corrupt. So this package is designed to try to deal with some of those, what I would call simple, no-brainer ideas.
Let's talk about a couple things that's happened recently nationally. Did you check out the debate, and what are your thoughts on the presidential debate?
I did watch the debate, and I found it embarrassing. I found it embarrassing. As I was watching it, grinding my way through, 45 minutes or an hour, just trying to hang on, I remember thinking that these gentlemen have forgotten some of the basic lessons we were taught in kindergarten, having to do with the appropriate way to address someone, the language that you use, the willingness to let someone finish a sentence before you start talking over them, the willingness to follow the rules that you agreed to. I mean, that's grammar school stuff, and it was embarrassing. And I appreciate that both candidates feel strongly about that which they feel, but that doesn't alleviate our obligation to listen to the other side, and more importantly, let the American people listen to the other side. And I really hope, assuming that we have debates 2 and 3, that both candidates will demonstrate a stronger ability to control themselves.
Obviously, over the past 3 or 4 days, President Donald Trump contracted COVID and coronavirus, and that's been all the news all weekend, including up till this morning. Your opinion, the latest you've heard, and where do we stand there?
Well, I mean, first of all, to the president, to his wife, his family, and to all of the people who've been afflicted by the pandemic, I mean, thoughts and prayers to all of them for a speedy recovery, and also prayers that we see the development of a safe and effective vaccine and treatment for this. 2020 has brought us more than a handful of unexpected twists, now hasn't it, Jeff?
Every day. Yeah, every day.
To me, this is just the latest one. I tend to think that we live a life which we should never be surprised by the turn that suddenly pops up in front of us. I think that's been particularly true of this calendar year, and I speak to more and more constituents who will be glad when 2020 is over.
There you go.
And I'm having trouble disagreeing with that.
There you go. I'm gonna see if Daniel. I may have to relay the question. Daniel, I have another question for Dale Ryder.
I was just gonna keep going with kind of the thing we were talking about with the presidential debate. Based on the debate, how do you see the election turning out? And if you don't see it a certain way, how do you see the state of America these next 4 years, whether no matter who wins?
Did you get to hear that at all? Basically, yeah. Okay, good. That's a good question.
I am. First of all, I'm a terrible person when it comes to predictions. I'm wrong all the time, but I'll go ahead and give you mine. So, I think the president right now, if I look at the polling, the president right now, I think is a little bit behind where he was in 2016. I mean, remember in 2016, then Secretary Clinton had a sizable lead, and the president continued to narrow the gap, but was still 2 to 3 points down in most of the battleground states that he wound up winning. I think you have a similar dynamic going on now, whether or not he can overcome what I would consider to be some of his unforced errors and get over the line like he did in 16. I don't know the answer to that. I think that, there are similar dynamics in terms of the poll trends, but there are lots of different dynamics in terms of obviously who his opponent is, what's happened in the meantime. I think that the president probably was in good shape for re-election before the pandemic. And this has put a different set of variables on the table. I do want to speak to, and I'm glad you asked the question about the post-election America. We live in a country where we feel and see evidence of increasing tensions along racial lines. And I think it's a mistake for us to believe in the proposition that those tensions will either be aggravated by over the long term or quelled by over the long term the election of a certain candidate. And here's why I say that. The president, while carries obviously the bully pulpit, is exactly one person, okay? And racial tensions have to do with lots of issues that no president of the United States gets to control. It's mostly about the issues that I mentioned earlier, and that is having to do a lot with what we learned when we were a lot younger. And patience with people, a willingness to listen to people, a willingness to try to understand where a person's coming from on both sides. I want to be clear, on both sides. The virtue of the First Amendment, of which we enjoy the protection, is obvious in terms of government not allowing restrictions on speech. But with that First Amendment, the blessing or the gift of the First Amendment, to me, there's an obligation. And that is not only do you have the right to say that which you want to say and express your feelings, you have an obligation to listen. You have an obligation to listen. Now, in a free society, that's what's great about freedom. You don't have to listen. You can say what you want and then you can walk away. But you have to ask yourself, is more and more of that going on in this society, and does that contribute to the issues that we're dealing with?
There you go.
I think so.
That's a good answer. Good question, Daniel.
Thank you.
Good students here at EIU. I want to go back to Illinois, and the big thing right now, well, not a big thing, probably a smaller thing in terms of everything going on, but is Governor Pritzker's basically just lack or care or refusal to talk about students and sports and getting kids back into classrooms. And I know there's legislation that went last week up in the Chicago court. Talk about sports and Pritzker and what your opinions are.
I think that the governor, I think the governor slipped a little bit in his handling of this. I believe that when this started, the governor decided on a course of action, and he was bold in that. I was reticent to question him publicly because he was facing a situation that none of us have ever faced before. And when someone's dealing with a situation like that, you got to cut them a little slack, right? I think now, if you look around the country, and you raise sports, and I'm a cross country coach over here at Mattoon, and of course we're running with restrictions, but we're running, and I'm very, very thankful for that. But let's take a sport like football. Most states in the country are playing football. Every one of Illinois' neighboring states is playing football. I mean, if you look at a map of the states that are or are not, Illinois is kind of an island. And in those states, and I'm going to use Indiana because we're relatively close to the border, we don't hear stories about breakouts or deaths or high hospitalization. We just don't hear those. And I think it's because the school districts in Indiana have taken care of the fact that these are their students, and they have to put in place systems to protect their students and their families to the best that they can. Now, there's only so much that they can do. I mean, if someone with underlying conditions chooses to be careless, no one can save them from their own carelessness. This is a free society. But I would say that what you see the Indiana schools doing, I would suggest to you that Illinois schools could do the same thing. That Illinois school administrators and teachers and the people who work in those districts care just as much about the children and the children's families as do those in Indiana. And that, to me, is why they ought to be playing. I mean, with certain restrictions, yes, they should be playing. There is a cost, Jeff, and now I'm talking not just about sports, but I'm talking about the socialization versus isolation question. Generally speaking, there is a cost to this. There is a cost to this in terms of child abuse. There's a cost to this in terms of increased alcoholism and drug use, in terms of depression. Now, we may never get those numbers, but we know that's true. We know that's true, and I hope that the governor's office is thinking as carefully about those issues and the importance of us being together physically, even if it's an offensive lineman and a defensive lineman trying to smash each other, the importance of being together in a very real sense as he is paying attention to positivity rates and issues like that.
Okay. The other thing I want to talk about in Illinois is the census was behind. I know COVID obviously was a big factor in that. Have you heard anything lately about census numbers and where we're at in terms of the percentage of people that are doing it?
No, we're still behind, and the issue that's going to raise, Jeff, I think, as we get into next year, the question is going to be whether or not the states, and specifically now Illinois, will have complete census numbers when it comes time to draw the next legislative map. We've never drawn a map, to my knowledge, without complete census numbers, and I think the question for the Democratic majority and for the governor will be, how do you want to proceed on that? I think going forward without complete census numbers would be a mistake. At the very least, you're going to have to draw the lines again, right?
I think so, yeah.
It subjects the map. It subjects the map to a whole new set of issues in terms of lawsuits and litigation. I just don't know why you would do that. So obviously, we hope that we get the census numbers in time in order to begin the map-making process, but there's certainly no guarantee of that right now.
Okay. The other thing I want to talk about is the other big news out there nationwide is the vote by mail registration and all the stuff that's going on where, you know, do you believe there's going to be voter fraud, or do you think that we can do what we've always done as a country and put on an election and do it correctly?
Well, there's going to be voter fraud. There's always some voter fraud.
Yeah.
I mean, the question is whether or not you can contain it to the degree necessary to still have confidence in the election results. When we talk about vote by mail, Jeff, we tend to just use that general label. There are lots of different types of vote by mail. Illinois, for example, the voter has to specifically apply for the mail-in ballot. So Illinois voters get a notice from the county clerk's office asking if they want to apply for a mail-in ballot. They have to fill that out. They have to send it in. Then they get a ballot back in the mail. They fill that out. Then they mail that back in. They're all bar-coded. I think the system is fairly well designed. I wouldn't say perfectly designed. I think we could have some more safeguards. Now, but I'm going to say there are 9 or 10 states where they don't require the application process. So the county clerk is just getting their list of registered voters, and they're dropping ballots out in the mail. And the problem with that is this, Jeff, is that we have seen instances, not just in Illinois, but around the country, where county clerks have either been delinquent or, quite frankly, intentionally not updated their voter registration list. So people who've passed away, people who've moved, whatever it might be, who are no longer appropriately registered voters in the county, nevertheless are receiving the ballots themselves in the mail. Now, I think that's a mistake. I think that not knowing that those rolls are updated and then sending ballots out to those people does open a door, because it's not hard to envision a system by which a county clerk who has partisan intentions that are inappropriate, knowing that their list is not updated, sending out those and having people fill those out and send them back. Okay, that's a possibility. And I'm a little concerned that when you have a gap in the system like that, whether it was intentional or unintentional that the gap was left there.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes. Sorry. We have about 4 minutes left with Senator Dale Ryder. I'm going to ask Daniel if he has any last questions from a student perspective.
Sure. You kind of mentioned a little bit earlier that you work in Mattoon. You're also from Mattoon. You're also an Eastern alum. Go Panthers. Your son actually goes here as well. Your son Ben goes here as well. Can you, I understand you have a bachelor's in accounting, so can you kind of tell us how you went from going to school for accounting to becoming a state senator? How does those two kind of coincide or work together?
He's done his homework, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's good, I'm telling you, man.
Yeah, better than the students they had here in the 80s, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I am a proud alum of Eastern Illinois University, and even when I was in college, I had an interest in politics. I had an interest in the law, but I also had an interest in business. And so to me, and I'm blessed that it worked out the way I intended, my thought was, I'm going to get a business-related degree as my undergraduate. Then I want to go to law school. the business-related degree will hopefully allow me to make a living if I choose not to go to law school, or I can't get through law school, or whatever the reason might be, and I'll be doing something that I enjoy. Well, I was able to graduate and then went on to law school. My interest in politics was really, I was in college. I can remember being at Eastern, and this is back in the good old days when there were periodicals like Newsweek and U.S. News and World Report and Time, that's still around, and I read all of those. I was kind of the geek following national politics back then. When I got a little bit older and became a prosecutor, I then got interested in the issues. I was always interested in the elections, but then I started to take an interest in the actual issues, and why is it that while I'm in court, I'm prosecuting someone, why is that person over there at the defense table here? What happened in their lives? What fell short? What went wrong that landed them in this felony courtroom? And that kind of then finally those two, the issues and the politics, put together, and that's when I was ready to jump into professional politics.
Now, how will you handle the closing of your district offices? Is there a process so people know how long they can contact you and all that? Can you go through that? We have about a minute and a half left, Dale.
Yeah. So I looked at the calendar. I think my last day will be January 12th. That's a Tuesday. The next day is when the new General Assembly is sworn in. Now, the Republican candidate for state Senate, Darren Bailey, who I expect will be the winner, will have an office here in Mattoon. I think he may be sitting in the space that I'm sitting in right now. I'm hopeful for that. So I'm good through January 12th. After that, I'm moving about 10 blocks to the west for the law offices of Dale Ryder. So I'll still be relatively close by, and obviously, just like they do now, anyone's welcome to come by and say hello.
There you go. With 1 minute left, I'm going to ask you a couple rapid fire questions. Favorite memory of going to Springfield? Some fun story or fun memory?
I remember the first week that I was there, actually getting ready to come home, and the snow, it was an early snowfall, and driving by the Capitol on the way back and looking up and seeing the holiday lights that were on the Capitol building and the snow falling, and thinking to myself, wow, I'm here. Now what? and the 23 years has passed just like that.
Wow, that's a good one. What won't you miss about Springfield? And don't just say Democrats.
Oh no, the politics of nonsense. I mean, politics is politics, and politics and governance are always going to be intertwined. That's the way it's always been in this country, always will be. But the unnecessary, quite frankly, stupid stuff that wastes everyone's time, that people who are real decision makers and who are serious and get it, turn their backs and roll their eyes and saying, I can't believe this is going on again. I won't miss that.
Dale, it's been a pleasure having you on as a state senator. We'll definitely stay in touch on the other side, but you've always been a good friend of WEIU, and we all thank you for that.
You guys do great work there. Thanks for having me.
Everybody have a great day. We are WEIU.